to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Mayor Beagle.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Resnick.
Present.
Councilmember Behrman.
Present.
Councilmember Gotcho.
Here.
Councilmember Grenlin Fox.
Here.
Councilmember O'Day.
Here.
Councilmember Sharp.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Changes or additions to the agenda as presented tonight. City Manager Brown.
Yes, Mayor, we're going to ask to flip the order of new business items number 3 and 4, if you would, please. They would flow better if they were flipped.
Any from Assistant City Manager?
I have none, sir.
Any from the dais? Deputy Mayor.
Yes, I'd like to move the Downtown Development Authority minutes of November 19th, 2024 on the consent agenda to new business item number 8, a discussion about the C2G safety audit.
Very good. Anybody else? All right. Correspondence, we have no correspondence tonight, which brings us to, approval of minutes. We've got one set of minutes to approve tonight, and that's from the regular city council meeting of January 28th, 2025. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Support.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I've got a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the regular city council meeting of January 28th, 2025. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We have no correspondence tonight, and it brings us to city manager's report. The first one is the fire report of December 2024. Any questions? All right. The second report is the police report from December 2024. Do we have any questions? Councilmember Gaccio?
Thank you. Maybe not a question about what's in the report, but would it be possible at a future meeting to get an update on any flock camera related activity that's been like helpful, or if we haven't had any activity, anything like that?
Sure, I can put something together and have it for you in the next, for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Moves us on to the consent agenda. All items listed under the consent agenda are considered routine by City Council and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member so requests, in which event the items will be removed from the consent agenda and added to the regular agenda at the end of unfinished or new business. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Support.
Thank you. I got a motion and support to approve the consent agenda as presented tonight. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Call to the public. This is the first call to the public, and the rules of call to the public are as follows. The public shall address the council during the call to the public, which shall be included on the agenda immediately after correspondence and again immediately after new business. The first call to the public immediately after correspondence shall be limited to agenda items only. The person shall not address the council in excess of 5 minutes unless the time is extended by a majority vote of the council present. Persons wishing to address the council shall identify themselves and their place of residence and shall state their reason for addressing the council, and all comments by the public shall be made directly to the council. Do we have anybody for the first call to the public? Seeing none, I'll close the first call to the public. We have no unfinished business to take care of tonight, so we'll move on to the first item of new business. And that's new business number 1 is a recommendation to authorize services for the annual downtown flower installation and maintenance from Eckert's Greenhouse of Sterling Heights, Michigan at a cost of $4,648, and Worry-Free Outdoor Services of Royal Oak, Michigan at a cost of $41,500 from Downtown Flowers account number 248-729-956.056 for the 2025 season. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Very good. And before we get into any discussion on this, just to be transparent, the owner of Worry-Free Outdoor Services is a fellow basketball official of mine, and I have refereed some games with him, so I don't think it's going to be an issue, but I just want to bring that out there so everybody knows that it's there. So with that, I have Laura Cloutier, the Executive Director of the DDA.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Here we are once again for the flowers. So last year, my board and this body gave me the task of researching some other options for the cost of the flowers, and it has taken me almost a year to do that. So before you, we have our current vendor, Landscape Design Associates, if you remember, we signed a 1-year agreement with, originally we went for a 3-year agreement, and the DDA board and city council authorized a 1-year agreement with the option of signing the 2nd and 3rd year if needed. And also with that, we did some financial breakdowns if it was going to be brought in-house, and researching that with Tim Sikma, the cost was adding up to over $200,000. Once we hit the $200,000 mark, we kind of stopped adding up. So that brings us to Eckert's Greenhouse of Sterling Heights, Michigan, and Worry Free of Royal Oak. And this option with Eckert's Greenhouse gives us the same diameter in baskets, 16 inches, but this also lessens the watering, the maintenance that they come out. If you recall, in previous years, we've had maintenance every day. They come out and water and fertilize and deadhead the flowers. This will lessen it to 3 days a week because of the way these baskets are designed. Each basket holds a 1-gallon reservoir for water it has tubes in it to bring up the water to continually water the baskets. So with that, it will be less maintenance overall. Eckert's Greenhouse will plant the baskets like we've had before. They will store the baskets for us so we can reuse them from year to year. There is a 10-year warranty on the baskets, so we expect to get at least the 10 years out of them, with minor damage or anything like that happening. They install them, they deliver them, and they will take them down in the fall for us and then store the pots for us. All Worry Free is going to do is come out those 3 days a week and maintain the baskets for us by watering and deadheading and fertilizing at a cost of $46,148 for the season. I'm sorry? Right.
Councilmember Behrman.
I thank you for taking the time to research it. Obviously, the price saving is not astronomical.
No.
But it is what it is, if that's what the cost is for flowers. Are you comfortable you're comfortable trying a new company to see, it's only 1 year?
Yeah.
And at the end of that, we can evaluate whether or not you want to try to go back or stay with these people?
Exactly, yes.
Will there be a discount moving forward with the pots, owning the pots?
It should be less because we are purchasing the pots.
But that
upfront.
price is included in the $4,600?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you for taking the time. I wish the cost savings were more, but it is what it is, and if it's what the DDA wants, I'm in support of it.
Thank you.
Very good. Councilmember Sharp?
Thank you, Mayor. I spoke to Ms. Cloutier before the meeting and got some of my questions answered, but when I saw this was on the agenda, my first thought was, no, we're going to do something different this year. It was underwhelming is a positive way to put it for what our flowers have looked like the last few years. Small, can't see them, they're all over the place, and I understand you're going to look at maybe repositioning some, that's fine, we'll talk about that. But then when I saw that you are trying something different, I really appreciate that. It's not a huge savings, but it wasn't really ever about the money, it was about getting what we pay for, which I'm not sure about the rest of the council, but I never felt like we got $50,000 worth of flowers, appearance or whatever. So hopefully this will be the solution. So thank you for finding us a new possibility, staying within budget, it's all good, so I'll support this. Give it another try, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Also happy about the cost savings, they are there at least, and echo some of Councilmember Sharp's comments about underwhelming in terms of the colors popping. I had the opportunity to see both Hollins and Traverse Cities, again, mostly from memory now, but I think they were pretty good. Better than what we had with the darker colors, just not popping and visible when you come in. I'm glad you're gonna look at the density, because it seems like we have them so spread out that you didn't even notice them, right, in certain areas.
Right, in certain areas. I would say definitely on Wixom and Old Wixom Road, we're going to look at where those brackets are located currently and reconfigure those. As I relayed to Councilmember Sharp earlier, not everywhere in downtown has light posts, so there seems like are a lot of gaps because of that reason. So we are going to look at where the brackets are and if we can move them around and make them more abundant in certain areas.
Change will be welcome. How many years were we with the other company?
We were with them for 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm in support.
Thank you. Councilmember O'Day.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple. I mean, I guess as far as the savings goes, I think that's great. As a matter of fact, not to see, you know, with the price of how everything goes up, particularly flowers every year, I think it reflects more of a savings than just the dollars, actually, from a percentage standpoint. So thank you for that. Then my other question, though, is with regard to the maintenance with Worry-Free Outdoor Services, is this negotiable as we move through the summer? So for instance, watering 3 days a week, well, if we go through, you know, a period of no rain for weeks upon end, or vice versa, how can this be amended? And what would the cost or savings be?
I have talked to them about that, and I talked to them again today about that, like if we get a dry spell of 100-degree weather in the summer. And they said that they would come out 1 extra day at no extra charge. So.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Cottrell.
Thank you. Still kind of stuck on the cost overall. I know there is some cost savings, but it still comes out to be very expensive per pot. I do not, like, it does add a nice touch to the city, and we talk about reconfiguring. I don't know, moving into the future, if it might make more sense to condense around certain corners or buildings, and maybe we don't need as many pots that we're getting, and we can make a bigger impact by grouping some together to further get reductions. I did notice, so this $200,000 for DPW, and Mr. Sigma is not here tonight, but last year after all of our discussions, I was driving to my office and going down Benstein Place past Claire Miller Park, and there were 2 ladies with a minivan and their trunk open with a giant water tank in the back and a hose, and that's how Wolverine Lake is watering their flowers. So it's a little, I think, like outlandish to think that we need to buy a ton of equipment and upgrade a bunch of equipment and have staff water 4 times a week when this is going to be 3 times. Granted, the pots are different. So I hope that we can continue to look at this in the future to see what can be done to change it. Have we explored at all the thought, I know like we have sponsors for our different Parks and Rec department events and concerts and whatnot. Have we looked at exploring any possibility of letting businesses or residents or other people sponsor certain flower pots? Like maybe they get a placard for the Smith family and they come downtown and they can see, hey, that's our flower pot, we contributed that, and that helps maybe offset some of the cost of this?
We have not as of yet, but this did come up in the last DDA meeting, and
Okay.
that's something we told them that we would explore
Okay.
for the
Yeah.
future.
And then related to, I think it was Councilman Behrman's question about the possibility of future discount. Do we know like what that cost savings should be once we've purchased the pots? Or is there some possibility that next year the quote is the same, and even though we purchase them, it doesn't change anything?
Yeah, sorry, let me go to the quote.
They're $19 a piece,
They're
$13.68,
$19 a piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
about $1,400.
Yeah.
But that, so we've discussed with them, like next year our bill shouldn't be $41.50 every 2 weeks, it should be,
Right.
or no, that's
No, the water-
Worry-Free, that's
Yeah.
Eckerd, so,
Right.
yeah, for Eckerd, it should be 1,300 or whatever less they
Yes.
said that that
Yes.
will be the case?
Yes.
Plus 20%.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Very good. Anybody else? I just want to thank you for your hard work. You know, anytime you can save money, whether it's $1 or, in this case, $3,700, it's great. And I know that was one of the big points at the DDA meeting too, that you were going to make sure that the baskets were going to be substantial this year, and we were going to get our money's worth. So I'm sure of that. So with that, I've got a motion and a second to approve the recommendation to authorize services for the annual downtown flower installation and maintenance from Eckert's Greenhouse of Sterling Heights, Michigan, at a cost of $4,648, and Worry-Free Outdoor Services of Royal Oak, Michigan, at a cost of $41,500 from Downtown Flowers account number 248-729-956.016 for the 2025 season. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your work, Laura. Brings us up to new business number 2, and that's a recommendation to approve a preliminary condominium plan from Quadrants Development LLC for a 70-unit condominium development on a 7.2-acre portion of the 10.4-acre site that is conditionally zoned VCA-TR Village Center Area Transitional Parcel Identification Number 22-06-200-035 with conditions as recommended by the Planning Commission. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Very good. Assistant City Manager Benson.
Thank you, Mayor. Ultimately, I will defer to our planning consultant, Mateo Pasalacqua, to walk through the finer details of this project. But just to give it a kind of quick introduction, you may be familiar with this project and this kind of topic after the conditional rezoning that City Council approved last August. This is the kind of next step of that project. Preliminary condominium plan approval. This project did receive preliminary approval from the Planning Commission, which is step 1 of 4 for condominium projects. So it comes to City Council tonight. If it were to be approved by City Council, their next steps would be to address comments and conditions and concerns and submit for final with the Planning Commission, and then back to City Council for the final piece. With that in mind, we do have the applicants in the audience tonight, but I will defer to Mr. Pasalacqua to kind of walk you through the plan as it's presented tonight.
Good evening, Mateo Pasalacqua, Carlisle Workman Associates. We are the city's planning consultant. So as Drew had said, and kind of in the staff report, we're looking at the 70-unit multifamily development for the site as part of a conditional rezoning. Excuse me. And so this is just for the 7.2 acres of the site, and the conditions that were associated with that rezoning are in our review, and we've worked with council on what those are, and the applicant's agreeable to those. With that, kind of the plan that you have in front of you, we met with the applicants on December 9th. They had an original submission that we did a preliminary review on. As part of that review, we came back with several recommendations for how the site either needed to meet requirements or recommendations on design and how we felt it could better fit within the VCA. What you have in front of you tonight is a first revision of that plan. And I just wanted to note that because the applicant did make an effort to meet a lot of the recommendations that were set forth by the city in that meeting on the 9th. With that, you'll notice that in the review itself, we have areas that talk about requirements, and we have areas that reference recommendations based on the city's design guidelines. I'll kind of get to what those recommendation conversations were about a little bit further in my summary, but I just kind of wanted to reinforce that when we reference a requirement, it is a requirement. When we reference a recommendation, it's typically a preference that's guided by a design guideline document that you have, where we put it out there as a reference to foster a conversation between either Planning Commission and the applicant or City Council and the applicant. Our position is that if the city has those documents and paid for those documents, we should reference them in some way. So that's where those recommendations came from. But if you have any questions about those or the difference between that and a requirement, I'm happy to answer those. As it relates to the area width, height, and setback requirements, there's no issues with the development as proposed. From a natural resource perspective, the site is relatively clear, has no major natural features on it to consider. When we looked at essential facilities and services, kind of the big ones here is that the proposed detention pond for this development is sized to also be shared with the existing gas station, but then whatever developments might potentially happen on the remaining 3.2 acres. And that as part of your VCA ordinance, it does require the burying of utility lines, which the applicant is agreeable to. When we looked at parking, the way the ordinance is structured is that the site would require 140 parking spaces. They could get up to 168. There's a 20% allowance that they're allowed to ask for over. Anything above that is required to get a waiver from the Planning Commission. So the site has 195 spaces without garages. And at the Planning Commission meeting, there was a conversation about the parking numbers. And the Planning Commission did recommend the waiver to allow for the proposed 195 spaces, not including the garage spaces. When we looked at site access and circulation, there's one drive that comes off Pontiac Trail that kind of starts as a boulevard, works its way into 2 lanes, and then kind of reorients back into a boulevard and then splits to go to Gibson Drive. One recommendation that was offered was that maybe that boulevard would be a straight linear shot from Pontiac Trail to Gibson. This is again kind of derived from the VCA design guidelines that kind of reference older neighborhoods from the 40s, kind of the pre-war era of a block design. We also do try to eliminate curb cuts, as many as possible. So we did kind of present that to the Planning Commission as a conversation. At the end of the day, the Planning Commission really didn't have too many concerns about the site access and drives as you see them presented to you this evening. There was a little bit of a concern that a linear drive might create a traffic cut through and speed traps, and that also kind of the diverting the traffic around to Gibson would slow traffic down and kind of act as a calming factor. So at the end of the day, while the recommendation was there per your guidelines, the Planning Commission didn't have any major issues with the site laid out as you see it now. There is a proposed drive to the east that would connect with the remaining site, should it be developed. And that's good because that kind of promotes the connection within the VCA. So they are kind of accounting for future developments on the site to the east. One of the issues that we had cited was that we wanted to try to address some of the pedestrian access or pedestrian circulation issues. And a result of that was a conversation between the applicant and the Planning Commission about additional crosswalks, kind of defined on the plan via paint, more in the southern portion of the site. And that also that the Planning Commission and the applicant were agreeable to developing a pedestrian connection to Gibson Park to the west, which is great. I mean, the site benefits from having that as its neighbor, and the fact that the residents would have a pedestrian connection to that would, hopefully would see better utilization of that park. When we looked at landscaping, you have, in the VCA, you have a little bit different landscaping requirements than your standard zones. The landscaping and open space requirements are not as restrictive or heavy, but that's really just because the intent of the VCA is to permit dense developments. So they're kind of structured in that manner to allow for more developable area than necessarily area devoted to landscaping or open spaces. With that said, the site is compliant with landscaping counts and layouts. We just need some species swapped out. There's just some trees identified that are not permitted in the city that the applicant's agreeable to making those changes at final. And we did note that the species that they selected do complement the VCA design guides when it talks to seasonal color and the types of flowers and or trees that would be used on a site. Lighting, the VCA has its own lighting ordinance, so you have your standards and then the VCA has its standards. The applicant, when they did this plan, originally cited the city's standards and not the VCA's. They've acknowledged that there's nothing that we can't work around. They need to change some heights and some designs, but that's nothing that we can't work through at final. So when we look at the buildings themselves, the floor plans, the elevations, and the architectural requirements, there's 12 buildings on site with 2 architectural styles, one being townhome, another being stacked. The townhome condominium buildings range between 5 to 7 attached units, while the stacked condominium buildings contain 6 units within them. Floor plans range between 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, and 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom units. Townhome units are approximately 2,000 square feet, while stacked units vary between 1,200 square feet and 1,520 square feet. The building design style, porch requirements, window coverage, exterior finishes, and spacing are compliant. I just say that because your VCA ordinance is pretty technical, so I just got to throw out there that there are a lot of kind of nitty-gritty requirements as it relates to those things, but the site is compliant with those. One thing that we do know, or at least the applicant offered up after our review, is that the site's not going to utilize any vinyl siding. They did put that in their response letter. We're just asking that that note be added to the site plan. I like notes like that on the site plan because that's what everyone looks at in 20 years, not the response letters. Where we noticed and identified some conflicts with these guidelines is that the stacked units, garages, some of them face the central drive, and your VC ordinance is pretty big about front door, front porches, things like that along roads. We do acknowledge that the central drive through the site is not a road, but that we do still try to reference that the design guidelines are there to kind of promote that neighborhood style. Another one was that there are stacked unit doors that face the side or rear of the townhome buildings. Again, trying to kind of promote that front door to front door view. The way in which those items were addressed and the conversation kind of went with the planning commission was that the applicant was agreeable to putting or using a more decorative style of garage door so that the views of those doors would be softened, is probably the best word to use, and that architectural elements would be added to the ends of the townhome buildings. So again, when you have that view, it's not going to be necessarily just a flat brick wall with some siding. There'll be some architectural elements that'll kind of add to the visual cue. So again, kind of as it relates to those concerns, some decorative ornamental garage doors and some additional architectural elements being added to the townhome buildings were the agreed upon solution between the planning commission and the applicant. For the condo regulations, there's no major concerns here. They meet the requirements of your condo regulations. Overall, the PC was pleased with the site layout. They were agreeable to kind of the compromises that were made regarding some of the design elements. And then, my apologies, I'm just reading my last note here. Once we worked through that, the PC made the recommendation, the conditional recommendation for the city council to approve of the preliminary site plan with the conditions listed in the planning report. So, thank you for your patience. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Behrman?
Yeah, I'll start. Thank you. First and foremost, the general layout of the buildings and the architectural of the buildings looks nice. I'm fine with that. I like some of the suggestions you mentioned about the ends of the units to look better. Although I really do feel, I spent about several hours today researching this and then reading our ordinances, and I feel like our planning commission, the developer, and possibly our consultant really dropped the ball on the number of parking spaces, because our ordinance is extremely clear that the number of parking spaces includes the number of spaces in garages. And I don't believe that was clear at all in your recommendation, your report that went to Planning Commission that approved this. And there's 116 spaces in garages. There's 116 spaces stacked behind the garages, and there's 79 parking spots proposed in this development. 311 parking spots for 70 units. That's 4.5 parking spots per 1 unit. That's extreme overkill and an extreme waste of their money to be building this much concrete. And if you look at this plan, that's the number one problem I have with it. It's all concrete. There's very little green space. Personally, I'd like to see, maybe the space between buildings 7, 8, 9, and 10, take all those angled parking spots out and just put in a central park in the middle of the community. Make it a nice green space where families can hang out. I mean, these are 2 to 3 bedroom units. There's going to be families living there. Having an area where families could hang out would be wonderful inside the complex. But as this is right now, it's too much asphalt, too much concrete, and I feel like nobody even took the time to read our ordinance. because it's very clear in section K that the parking includes the spaces inside the garages. But that wasn't referenced in any of your memos. And it's also very clear on the intent behind this, which is to prevent these huge asphalt lots, which is what this is. I mean, a quick search, we're looking at, what, $10,000 probably per parking spot, and they're proposing to put in an extra 100 parking spots? That's a huge waste of their money when it could be green space for the future residents. So I'm fine with the general layout, but for this coming back for final approval, they're gonna have to design this to meet the ordinance, and the ordinance is 70 units at 2 parking spaces per unit with a 20% bonus. If you want the bonus from the Planning Commission, that brings you to 196 spots. I have no idea why you're asking for 311 spots. I feel like that's a huge waste and extreme overkill for 70 units.
I mean, I'm happy to discuss a little bit how we went through that process.
You want to read section, the ordinance? I'm looking at the plans and how it was added up. It was the stack spots and the parking spots. Nobody added the 116 spots from the garages.
So in the first review that I had referenced, where we had a meeting on December 9th to kind of go over that one, our original review had called out and did count the garage spaces. The conversation that we had had with the applicant was because that created such a large number for the waiver, and because conversations that were had with the Planning Commission, and because of observed conditions where garages are not always used to park vehicles. We wanted to look at it from the perspective of, we want to make sure that the parking requirement is met utilizing driveway space or the equivalent thereof and not on-street parking. Because if we short the parking, and I'm an urban planner, right? Like, parking's a 4-letter word, even though it's 7, is if we don't provide enough spaces within a driveway, if someone utilizes the garage as storage, we don't provide enough space in the driveway, the vehicles end up elsewhere. The Planning Commission had cited early on in the conceptual conversations with the applicant a concern about, is there enough storage on site? Because that's what the garages are going to be used as, and if the garages are going to be used as storage, they want to make sure that there's enough parking on site. So when we had that meeting with the applicant, they had asked, and we had discussed, can we not necessarily count the garage spaces in our parking requirement? Given that with the garage spaces or without it, they have to ask for a waiver regardless, we were agreeable to, based on the Planning Commission's conversation and the observation that parking or the garages are being utilized less and less for vehicles, we were okay with that. I'm not necessarily saying that I am the end-all be-all and that interpretation is correct, but I also don't think it's incorrect based on the way that we're trying to look at the development and how that space will actually be used.
I don't believe you get to interpret the ordinance the way you want to interpret the ordinance. I think you're extremely mistaken there. The ordinance is clear. If the ordinance would like to be changed, that's up to us up here. That's not up to you. And I think your memo was not clear, and it didn't reference the ordinance correctly. And I agree, people like to use their parking for storage, or their garages for storage. And I agree, maybe there should be a bonus for that. But I don't think we need to get to the point of making this a complete concrete parking lot. And I don't see, even if half of the units use the garage for storage, there's no need for 311 parking spots for 70 units. And for reference, I looked at the Village Center layout downtown. Many of our condos downtown have 0 parking spots, and that does create some issues on the street. Some of them, the more recent ones, have maybe 10 spots for 40 units. I looked at a couple other communities' layouts, one that had a 180 unit layout where same concept, where they had 2 garages with 2 stacked behind it, and they only had 57 parking spots for 182 units. I don't see how an additional 100 parking spots are needed here. It should be green space, and I think it'd be better for the residents that are gonna live there, and it's gonna be better for the developer because they can save a lot of money on asphalt and concrete. Yes.
Councilmember Sharp?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want to echo exactly what Councilmember Behrman said, but that was my question, was why are there so many parking spaces? And I'm wondering, what is the Planning Commission, and I got to go back and read their minutes more thoroughly, what is the Planning Commission's concern over where are they going to park? I mean, what is the worry? And these are rhetorical questions, that they're going to go park in the retention pond, or are they going to park on Gibson Road, or it seems to me that if the people who own the two-car garage are upset they don't have any place to park, they're going to have to clean out the garage so they can park in there. I hadn't thought about it as being a concrete jungle until Councilmember Behrman, but I'm like, this is like 12 Oaks Mall now. We got a building in the middle and it's surrounded by parking spaces. So I'm not sure what we're trying to approve here and what the alternatives are going forward. You know, I don't know if you can take back our comments and potentially relook with Planning Commission the thought of fewer parking spaces. But if we're expected to approve a final site plan that looks exactly like this, which I don't think we are, this is preliminary, I would vote no, just based on what's in front of me today, if this were the final site plan. Based on comments we've heard already. But I don't get more than double the number, almost double the number of needed parking spaces. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you. Did you?
Just for reference, like if we, and I think it's fair to have the applicant address some of these concerns as well. If the parking were reconfigured or changed in a manner that's going to alter kind of the placement of the buildings or other major infrastructure, then that might be something where this would get tabled and go back as opposed to being part of a condition of final. I'm not saying that we still can't find that, but just as you kind of consider like how much of a change we want to discuss with the applicant, we just have to kind of make sure we have the right process in place for how we get there.
Councilmember Gatchel?
Thank you. Up until the comments that were made earlier, my first note for tonight was literally why so much asphalt. So that struck me as the first thing. I do share the thought that all of the angled parking should be done away with, and that should all become a centralized green space. I think that's also going to help with traffic flow prevention issues. Our former planner and those in the administration at the time had wanted to make all of our residential areas be cut through neighborhoods to a main roadway. And what we've found over the decades is people drive like buttholes in the city and they speed through neighborhoods, they run stop signs. This is at a major intersection that often gets stacked up during rush hour because we have too many red lights and too short of a distance. And I can foresee, since this becomes a cut through around that intersection, that traffic will start moving down Gibson through the neighborhood onto Pontiac Trail and in reverse. And my concern is that people would start driving unsafely if they have a straight shot through, which they kind of do in the current plan. But I do favor all of that becoming green space. I also would like to see the other, I guess I'll call it north-south parking, become adjusted to parallel parking that appears to be around buildings 5 and 6, just to the south of those, to help reduce some of the other parking density. We do have way too much parking in here. In the hope that as well, and I shared this during our conceptual meeting last summer, I would love to see buildings 1 and 2 come back a little bit further from Pontiac Trail. I think you're kind of building an adverse impact for those units. And are these definitely going to be sold, or are they going to be for rent?
Our understanding is that they would be sold. Again, that's a great question to further flesh out with the applicants, but given that they're subdividing this as condominiums, they would have the ability to sell them, and that is our understanding of their intent.
Okay.
They would have the legal ability to lease them as well, but
I guess getting a handle on that, because especially if these are going to become owner occupied, I think you're creating an adverse impact to the desirability of those few units facing a main roadway, and that's going to impact desirability, which impacts property values. So if we can draw back 1 and 2 away from the roadway a little bit more, I think I'd be happy with that. And that can be done by getting rid of some of the parking as it's structured now. Also related to parking, the comment be made that garages aren't always used for parking. We can't plan for what people are gonna do, and I think if anything, that's kind of a circle issue. If you provide extra parking outside of the garage, they're then going to fill their garage with useless crap and use the parking that is out there. Whereas if you do as most HOA condo developments do, in my experience in real estate, they say that garages are for parking, not for other nonsense. And so your vehicles are in the garage. If you have guests, then you can use guest parking, but that's not resident parking, that's guest parking. And so, and it's also not for boats and work trucks. So I think there's a way to make this a better looking situation with less asphalt, more green space. People want more green space in their life right now. I don't know anybody who is out shopping that wants to look at asphalt. That none of my clients put that on the list of things they're looking for. Backing up to private areas, green space, away from neighbors, that's all the feedback I hear. So I would prefer more green space on there. The other thing, kind of circling back to the cut-through traffic, would this be an appropriate time to discuss the addition of like speed bumps into at what point would that become a discussion factor? I genuinely am concerned about people cutting through here and driving like they're cutting through. I mean, there's people that cut through the Wixom and Charms old CVS parking lot to get around the light there, and they don't slow down at all from Wixom Road to Charms. They fly through the parking lot. I don't want to see that become an issue here where people are trying to get around rush hour traffic.
And we won't plow if there's a speed bump, correct?
no, these will not be public streets. So this is an opportune time to bring that up with the applicants. I will say there may be appropriate places to do that, and I'll defer to their discretion, you know, how they feel about that. But you bring up a very good point, Mayor. Whether we're plowing it or they are, speed bumps are a significant issue for plowing. This is the opportune time to talk about it, though.
Is this intended then that at some point in the future after it's done, we'll see a winter maintenance agreement like we do with the other?
No. With the other ones.
This is just straight city,
No, they're not city streets at all. They'll never be.
so why are we concerned about plowing?
I'm saying on their behalf. It's not, it wouldn't be us anyways. I'm saying I think that they would be, and I'm gonna defer to them on that, but they're still going to have to plow it. Somebody will. So speed bumps still continue to be a problem for any plowing effort.
Feasibly, they'd be using they wouldn't be using a city-sized
No.
plow truck to do that. They'll be using like an F-350 with a plow in front, or some other piece of equipment. So it's a little bit easier to figure out where you're gonna push snow and avoid the speed bumps. So I don't know if anyone else shares that concern, but I know people in my neighborhood constantly complain about people speeding through the neighborhood. People on the other side of the neighborhood want to make their portion of the neighborhood a gated community so people can't speed through it. I want to avoid any safety issues on cut-throughs, and I think speed bumps would be beneficial. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, that's probably one of the number one complaints we hear when we go to homeowners association meeting is the traffic and the speed that people drive in those neighborhoods. So that's probably something we should consider. Councilmember Grenell Fox?
So I understand and I actually agree with having some additional parking. I think this is probably a little excessive. But I do understand having some additional. I do like the idea of having the green space in that middle area. I don't know how many parking spots that would take away, but I think it would be a much more desirable development to have that green space there. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Resnick.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just a comment about the cut-through. The more traffic calming that could be incorporated, of course, be desirable, and I think residents that live along Fletcher or Goodrich are a testament to that in the newer subs, where people will use it as a cut-through, and that's quite a lengthy one. So I think that's a note well taken. And then, Mr. Pasalaco, as I always bring up, is the temperature of the lighting. I noticed the luminaires, the D-series LED luminaires will be used, as well as the halophane. The 3,000 Kelvin or warmer temperatures versus the 4s and 5s that make it look like a mall parking lot would be desirable. So I know that there's options there, but again, we don't want it to look like 12 Oaks Mall when you're driving by it. So that's all I have.
Councilmember Behrman?
I just wanted to put some better numbers to at least where I see the parking be realistic. I'm assuming that, let's just assume that half the people that live there are not going to park in their garage because they're going to have a gym there or there's too much stuff in their garage. That would knock the number of parking spots inside the garage down to 58. You're still going to have the 116 spots stacking in front of the garage. And I think a realistic number for visiting parking spots would be somewhere around 30. So that would give you, in theory, 204 parking spots, still over close to 3 per unit, and that's still 58 of them that could be used to give you more than that. Anything above that number, I just can't see why we're paving it, and I would have a really hard time approving it at final. And I'd like to hear, I guess, the applicant's reasoning behind coming in asking for 311 parking spaces. Above and beyond, they just don't think people are going to park in the garage. I just feel like someone had to miss the fact that the garage spaces are supposed to be counted.
The applicant would like to come up and discuss.
Good evening. My name is William Clark, Quadrants Development, 49140 Wixom Tech Drive, Wixom. With me this evening, I have Mr. Puda, who's the owner of the project.
Yeah, Marvin Puda, 31331 Old Wixom Road.
Hey, Marvin, watch your head there, what the TV said, too.
Yes, so it sounds like the big elephant in the room is the parking. I'm not here to dispute if you're right or we're right. We're here to try and work together and get this project underway. However, we do strongly feel that we need more than the parking that's allowed by ordinance. However, in an effort to work together, I would suggest that we remove some of the parking, but call it future parking in case it's needed. In case our experts are right that the parking could be needed. I'm not here to dispute if it is or it isn't, but I do want the ability that we can put parking back in as it's proven that it's needed. If it's never needed, the areas would stay green space. However, we already meet the ordinance for the green area and the landscape per the VCA. There's nothing in the VCA that says we need additional green space. We are next to Gibson Park. We did agree to work jointly with the city to place a path through for the residents to get to Gibson Park. And I don't know how many other facilities you have in town where they have a city park right next door that they can utilize, but this particular development will. We're trying our best to work with the city and build a high-end development. And I'm here to answer any more questions that you had, but if you would take that under consideration. There's one other thing, I think was Councilman Galchel. You mentioned the Pontiac Trail. Those units, we've explored that since the beginning of time, trying to move them back. They don't face Pontiac Trail. The people in those units will be looking to the south, not over at the industrial area.
I understand that, but like, they'll have windows out of the front of the building that will be looking at the road, and road noise will be coming through there. And just the general desirability, because it's the garages to the south front. I would guess it's front doors on the north side. That's why there's sidewalks there. for the
There's a
Pontiac
door on the
Trails.
front
Yeah,
side, yes, sir.
There's gonna be noise intrusion, and it's going to be, they are going to be less desirable.
And sir, that's a risk we're willing to take, but we don't believe that's so. The bedrooms will be on Pontiac Trail.
The bedrooms will be, you said.
Yeah, the bedrooms will be
Yeah,
Pontiac
that's-
Trail. The front of the house will be facing to the south, the living room, the kitchen, the living area.
Yeah, but the bedroom, like, if the bedroom's still a living area, it's not the living room, but if people are trying to sleep, depending on their schedule, and there's road noise going through, I would just prefer they're further away from the road. The rest of our residential developments along Pontiac Trail are set back further off the road than this is being proposed. And that's my concern. I understand that it's a risk that you're willing to take, but it's not, these will become permanent structures for all intents and purposes. Sure, they can be torn down in the future, but I don't want to design things that way. I would rather make things as seemingly good as possible and give this more of a setback than we have. If we're getting rid of some parking, then like that row directly north of 3 and 4, if that becomes parallel, that's a few feet there. I'm not by any means saying back it up 20 more yards. That's not, but if we can get a few more yards out of it, then I think every bit is helpful, because that road noise is going to play into it. That's a major thoroughfare for tractor trailers going up and down Pontiac Trail. Those aren't quiet vehicles. So that's my concern, is I don't want to put it into a situation where those become less desirable. If these are going to be sold and owner occupied instead of rented, then you're opening up the possibility that those become less valuable. Investors start to buy them to rent them out. Then you have an add-on impact potentially on the sorts of mortgages people can be using to purchase if you get to a point where they're non-warrantable, because there's so many renters and rental units in there. It all kind of stacks on. I don't think an extra few yards is gonna kill the situation on the design.
Well, our architect, unfortunately, tonight is home with influenza A, or he would have been here and he'd be better to address that. We will take your comments under advisement and see if there's something can be done.
Councilmember O'Day.
Thank you. Hi. Just a couple quick questions / comments. I thought I heard someone mention earlier, I don't know who it was, but there were two-car garages, or from what I saw, they were all one car, one stall.
No, some are two,
Some are two?
some are one.
Okay, that's my
Yeah,
mistake.
the stacked ones are ones, and the,
Okay.
or like 1.5s, you can call them, and then the townhouses are all 2s.
Okay, all right. Well, even with that being said, circling back to what we were saying, that we are planning on these being for families, I think we would have to anticipate that the average family has at least 2 cars, perhaps 3. So that's just more of a comment, I guess, that I think additional parking would be needed to some degree. And then I guess I would just say with regard to those units closer to Pontiac Trail, I'm not convinced a few yards is going to make much of a difference when it comes to the noise off Pontiac Trail, particularly with the, I don't know, state of the road there. So I would just say those units are priced accordingly and we move forward.
Well, may I speak?
Sure.
I believe there is a precedence in the city, just north of Pontiac Trail on Wixom Road. Are those condos that are near the road, is the value less than the other units?
They take longer to sell than they do sell for about, I think the interior units usually sell at about $320 on average, and those sell closer to $290 to $300.
And they're exactly the same?
The Brandon Robertson ones along Wixom Road across from Elementary do take longer and sell for less.
I mean, do you think if they were set back further, would they sell for more?
No.
Not necessarily, but I think they would probably sell a little bit faster.
And another question, have any of you lived in a condo complex?
Yes.
Okay, I have. And it was me and my wife, my kids were little at the time, it was when I first got married. And she would always park in the garage. It was at Green Point at Copper Creek on 13 Mile near Haggerty in Farmington Hills. That was my first, house when I got married. And she used to park in the garage because she's the wife. I want her in the garage, And it was the back-to-back kind of garage. And whenever I parked behind her, I gotta go, honey. So I'd have to pull my car out, get out of the way. She'd pull out. If I parked in the driveway or in the garage, it would be the same effect. So I had to find a parking spot somewhere. We were lucky, we were an end unit. So we had a little pad, a 2-car pad next to our end. And I used to I wound up parking there the whole time, because, it was just like a pain, And then if we had guests come over, guess what? I mean, we had one spot in front of the garage, and then the road, and then that little pad, I mean, let's try to make it usable. I want these to be desirable. You talked about the value. If I have no parking, I mean, I love the condo, it was no maintenance, I worked, we were busy, and, but the parking, just to be honest, kind of sucked, and our architect knows that from experience, so he beefed up the parking, and I agreed with it. I said, yeah, this makes sense. And so did all 7 planning commissioners. They all agreed with it and approved our request or waiver of whatever it was called, and it made sense. We meet the green belt. We have the pond right there that's going to be green all the time. We got Gibson Park, and this is downtown, right? We're not it's not supposed to be a regular subdivision. It's supposed to be downtown. Let's focus on that. That's the only points I wanted to make. I mean, I know you guys, this is still a relatively young downtown, but we're doing this to have some density in the downtown to make these, tenants survive. I mean, we want future tenants here.
Councilmember Behrman?
Thank you. That was actually going to be one of the questions. The detention pond, that's what you're including that in your green space calculation?
Part of it, not in the green space calculations per se, but we built around the top of the pond on the west side. You'll see a flat spot that is designed to have park benches and be a green space area.
Okay. I have zero issue with the density. I think the density makes sense. I think the design end product looks nice. My issue is it wasn't 311 spots for 70 units. Whether or not no one parks in the garage, you don't need that many. My view, if you close off the angled spot and make that more green space, you got my vote. And I'm not saying you got to agree to that tonight, but some way, shape, or form, we need to decrease some of this asphalt. I mean, even if you closed off that center area, that's 28 spots. That's still going to leave you with 280 plus parking spots, which is just not like any other complex or condo complex has. That's a huge number, getting people over 4 spaces per. Anything we can do, I think that's what we need to do. I think that's going to help you sell the units better, having that centralized green space, get more money, and then save your money and from pouring asphalt and concrete.
Well, Marvin and his family are in the business to make money here. And if they didn't think investing in more parking was going to assist with selling the units, they certainly wouldn't be doing it. But as I said in my earlier statement, we'd consider reducing the parking as long as we can address that area that would be used as temporary green space as future parking if the need proves out. Because obviously there's 2 schools of thought. I can't say who's right, who's wrong, but I do know I don't want us, the Puda family, to get boxed in where they have a condominium complex with inadequate parking that is detrimental to sales.
I guess my only response to that would be, if we're talking about removing 280 or 228 spots, leaving you with 280 spots when the ordinance only requires 140, you're still double the ordinance. I see no reason why you would ever need to fill that back end. That doesn't make any logical sense that you're going to ever need that many parking spaces.
Well, go ahead.
Just a real quick, let's say we offered only 140 spots. Let's use that number. That's what.
I don't think that's enough.
Yeah. Well, why not? You're saying that's what the ordinance allows.
Because I think we see that downtown now.
Yeah, exactly. So if I own a condo and I only have 2 spots, I wouldn't feel good there. I would want to move. I wouldn't want a place that I only have 2 spots without even a guest coming. You know, it's ridiculous. That would be ridiculous. So
you're providing 4.
Right. Yeah, because okay, suppose I don't own just 2 cars. I mean, I have teenagers, so I'm a bad example. I can't live in a condo, but suppose I have an electric car and my wife has a car and I have a pickup truck, for example. You know, I'm not going to drive the electric car all the time, or my sports car or whatever, you know. I mean, if I have only 2 spots or maybe 3, I mean, it's still, I don't think that's adequate, but we are willing to budge. I'm not saying like this is take it or leave it. That's far from that. I'm just trying to make a point, like trying to be practical here.
If I may, I was just gonna offer up something for consideration here. What city council could consider doing is you could amend your motion to add what would be condition number 19. And granted, I don't know if we're gonna settle on a number or if that's how that's gonna necessarily play out, but just to say, to some extent, the applicant, regardless of how this plays out, will have to do some degree of redesigning. Whether that kicks us back to, preliminary back at planning commission, or if this can at least have the 19th condition to go to final. But it could be something as simple as 19th condition that the parking, including garage spaces, is reduced to no more than 280, or I think that was the number you used earlier, or some kind of variation thereof, that a number that with the applicant here maybe that they'd be agreeable to. I was just offering that up as a mechanism to perhaps get where we're trying to go, to at least get through preliminary, let them get back in the design room, let us get back together and kind of figure out how to adjust that, if that's amenable to council.
Let's say they take those 28 spaces out and make it green space, and we just eliminate those spaces. In the future, could they come back and ask to put parking spaces there?
They could ask under an amended site plan, but I don't think that there's a mechanism that provides for a guaranteed approval.
Well, we do have some site plan examples where there is land bank parking. As the example, we did that at the Wixom Assembly Park. So that's something that has some precedent that could be called out on an existing site plan. Again, I don't know, what metrics would go into calling for that, but I will also say, depending on how you do that, it could impact the site plan. So just as an example, if we're talking about the 28 spaces in front of buildings 7, 8, 9, and 10, if they were to widen the central drive, there would be no room or widen the central park area, there would be no room to, I guess, unless you took out, you land bank the parking into that. So there's just a lot of variables is what I'm getting at, depending on how you do it. That's where having like a number that comes out of this at least gives the applicant some room to design it, figure out what works.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Resnick.
Yeah, I just wanted to add some comments after other council members have spoke, but regarding the proximity to Pontiac Trail, I don't think a few yards would make a world of difference. One just has to drive around Milford, village of Milford, and see how close a lot of those condos are, and they've been, rented out, or not rented out, but owned for years, right, by residents. Density, the VCA, the whole idea was to get the density, so, and I agree that a family that's gonna have one of the 2,000 square foot units will have at least 2 cars, maybe 3, right, if they have a teen at home. And residents of Anthem, can talk about that on Wright Street, on Theodore, on Goodrich, on Fletcher. If you have a birthday party, you're screwed. There's nowhere to park, right? And we stack them up on Goodrich with my daughter's house, and it's very, very difficult. So again, I have no problem with parking, but lighting is always my issue.
Sure.
So, that's all I have to say.
Councilmember Behrman?
I don't necessarily feel like I need to put a number in tonight because I think I've made my point clear. I did have the opportunity to speak to some of the planning consultants, and they did not, at least one that I spoke to, did not understand that there was 311 spots here because of how unclear it was in the plans and in the memo. Because the plans only had listed 116 stacking spaces and the 79 parking spaces. So they were working off the idea that there was 196 parking spaces, not 311 that you actually have. That's immaterial at this point. Anything you can do to eliminate some of the parking spaces to make sure you still have enough for the residents there. I don't think it was clear to everybody. I don't necessarily know if it was clear to you guys that there was 311 spots. I agree 3 to 4 may be ideal. That brings you to 280. you can clean up 28 of them and get a little bit more green space, I think it's going to be a slightly nicer development. But
I think we could live with 280.
Well, but you gotta remember, if the consultants that we have are right, you're gonna need that park.
Yeah.
And if you box yourself in, that's your decision.
But if we can have a future option, is that?
As long as that's in play,
Okay.
just preliminary tonight, we're not,
Yeah.
not final.
It's not set in stone.
right.
Councilmember Sharp?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm kind of backing off on my earlier comments. I have to recognize that the developers are the experts in what people want and will buy. And like you said, PUDAs are in the business to make money, not to build parking lots or give away space that people are paying for. So I would assume that you need those spots. You weren't very clear on why exactly. We were suggesting things. I didn't really hear a good reason why you needed more parking spaces in your mind. You did mention about having 2 cars and 1 car garage, and I get that, but this is like a 50%. But regardless of that, you're the experts. Planning Commission is appointed by council to do their job. They said this was the right number, meets the ordinance. It's preliminary, so I will vote to support this tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Gacho?
Thank you. I guess a process question. If this is approved tonight on a preliminary basis, how much changing is done? Because I don't know that I'm in favor of adding a specific number, because that could be the parking from buildings 3 and 4 that goes away instead of the more centralized area, and then I still don't think I'd care for it fully. So I don't know that going the number route, I would rather see it addressed and come back to us, whether that's through tabling or whatever. But if this were to get approved tonight, how much changing is allowed to be done before it comes back to us for final approval?
All of the conditions that are part of, recommended conditions to go to final, I don't see any that would change the placement of buildings or landscaping. So if there was a conversation about a condition that spoke to a reduction in parking, that would be something where, I think that I don't foresee, I'm not going to design the site for them. I don't foresee that if there was some condition related to the reduction in parking, that it would have a massive impact on building setbacks, where they are, the flow of the site, so on and so forth. I'm saying that sight unseen. But as it is right now, if you approved it with just the conditions that are provided, there isn't any of that really changes the site plan. A lot of it's technical information and things of that nature.
So if it's approved tonight, everyone says, oh yeah, we'll look at it, and then this comes back to us again, completely as is. We obviously have the ability to approve, deny, but at that point, do we also have the ability to table and request additional changes? Or like actually addressing parking, like, hey, you looked at it, but they gave us a wink and they didn't actually change anything?
Well, and that is where the idea of adding kind of a formal additional condition, and it could be even as simple as just to say, the applicant must supply additional information, justifying their parking calculations and/or reduce and receive an updated waiver from the Planning Commission. That's a reasonable condition that would have to be addressed in them going back to final Planning Commission, but could potentially, really stoke that conversation back with the Planning Commission about incorporation of the garage spaces, right? Duly noted on your point earlier that, if there was a misunderstanding with planning commissioners of how that parking calculation came together, and the number that they approved the parking waiver for, that should be updated. So I do think that that's a reasonable way that maybe doesn't tie the applicants to a specific number, but requires them to provide additional, study and information for the planning commission to consider when updating the parking waiver number. Does that make sense?
Potentially. I don't know that still gets us a change though, so like planning commission can just also say, yeah, cool, we'll approve whatever, which is kind of what.
Well, and then you still have the ability to deny it.
But I think the goal here is to avoid a denial before we get there. It's to address everything in, whether it's now through tabling or through adding a condition, but to avoid a denial, because then it's a waste of money. They have to reapply, restart the whole process, and that's pointless if there's just a few small changes that can hold it up. So it seems like it would be better, I don't know, between tabling it and having something addressed, or I don't think there's a clear way. I don't want to say provide more research about why you need parking spots, because I don't want to see it justified you can make any justification for anything. So I don't necessarily want to see a condition state that we need more information about why you need 300 plus parking spots because it'll be justified. Like, that's my concern. Also, looking at the site plan, I don't know how practical having the little island separators between the stacked unit parking and garages is going to be, and having to turn and back out of there. So I don't know if that helps at all, just opening that up, but there's all the little divider islands that are between the garages on 3 through 6, but I would prefer that's looked at. We'll see if anybody else has comments, but I don't know that I would be in favor of moving it forward with some vague prove it or lose it situation, or even a number, because then that's not tying a number. I would think I'd be more in favor of tabling and having it actually adjusted, and then we know what we're voting on, and that way there's little change between preliminary and final, except for the more technical items. I mean, addressing parking is wildly different than adding sidewalk dimensions into the plan. So one, we're talking an actual change, one, we're talking a paper change. So I don't know what everyone else feels, but I guess I'm a little leery of just another condition that maybe doesn't get us anywhere at all. I can appreciate that you're gonna have people that have more than 2 cars. Even those folks that buy or live in or rent whatever happens here, the 2-car units still have space for 4 cars in their spot. I understand that doesn't address parties and what have you, but people kind of live to whatever suits their lifestyle. I think another example of units that sell quite expensively for what they are, being I think it was Pulte, built on the old women's prison. Those usually sell for over $400,000. I've sold those, and those are nice, 3-bed and 2-bed, and they have a very central open park area. They actually have a plaque that talks about it being the old women's prison. I don't know why he would celebrate that, but that has, instead of the diagonal parking here, that has parallel parking to help increase the size of the central park. So I don't know. I will wait to hear if there's anybody else, but I think tabling is almost a better method of adjusting if the majority thinks things need to be adjusted. In terms of other comments, I know a few yards might not seem like a big deal. It is a big deal when you're talking a main roadway and semi-truck traffic. So I wouldn't play it off, and I honestly am a little tired of the listen to the expert situation. We're later going to be voting on something to put something on the ballot after we listen to the experts draft ballot language, and they screwed that up. As a council, we can't keep ceding to the developers know, the planning commission knows, this person knows, that person knows. They know what they want to know. They don't know it through our perspective of being on city council, trying to plan things the way we want them to be planned. We can't just cede all of our power to, this is their line of work and they're gonna tell us and we'll just say okay and rubber stamp it. I think we need to get away from that mentality. Thank you.
City Manager Brown.
Yeah, I was just going to offer up a couple of alternatives. I think what Councilmember Gottschall just mentioned as tabling being an option, one other option, and I could ask, if anybody else has any concerns about it, but adding language at the end of the recommendation or the action as recommended by Planning Commission and subject to addressing parking concerns or addressing the amount of parking on the site would be some way to at least get that in writing in what you've approved. As opposed to, referencing that we'll add some conditions that isn't going to be part of what you actually vote on tonight. So as far as I'm concerned, those are two options, something akin to what I just mentioned. You could play with the language to get it whatever you want, but otherwise I think tabling is in order at this point. It's one of those two things. If you want to have some sort of a motion that gives them the okay to move forward, knowing they have to address parking with some language you add at the end, or just tabling it. This is a constructive offer.
Councilmember Garland Fox.
So given that this is a preliminary approval and the applicants heard all of the comments up here as far as what's important, the parking, the green space, is there something that we can, I like your idea, City Manager Brown, as far as indicating that. Can we also add the comment about, and maybe it's just the comments that were discussed at the table, because that included more than just the parking,
Right.
albeit the.
That was an early version of my added language and had it included as discussed.
I really don't want to, I don't want to table it if we don't have to, and I don't want to deny it. If there's something that we can do that way, like I said, you've heard us, you know what the issues are, that we
Right.
can move forward in that way.
I would only caution you on the tabling piece. I mean, I think we need to look at this a little bit more in reference to the way this process lays out, but if it were tabled here, I'm gathering the expectation would be that a revised plan is brought directly back to City Council, so essentially skipping the preliminary step back with the Planning Commission. So my gut is that even tabling to make revisions like that's just going to take it back to the Planning Commission, but instead of being for final, it's for preliminary, which is a fine outcome. I'm just saying, because then Planning Commission wouldn't have approved the preliminary plan that you guys are approving. Do you understand what I'm saying? They become incongruent plans. So either way, my gut opinion is that this would have to go back to the Planning Commission as its next step, whether that's redoing preliminary or the first shot at final. But I just think there has to be congruence between the plans that you guys are looking at. They wouldn't have even seen it prior to coming back for then what would be their final. We need to research that a little bit more, but that's a concern I have process-wise. And just one other point on the comments. I think whatever kind of motion you all want to make is certainly council's prerogative. I think specificity matters, just because for the applicant's sake and for even Planning Commission's sake, when they look at the comments or the conditions or the motion that comes out of here, specificity I think is relevant. It kind of gets to Councilmember Gottschall's point, right? So if saying go back and review and justify or whatever kind of nebulous term, if it's not specific, it gets harder to, I guess, interpret that, if that makes sense.
Deputy Mayor Resnick.
Yeah, I am not in favor of tabling. I mean, we're going to delay this project. That land has been vacant since it was a dairy farm. Why? I mean, let's get this moving, right? If it's 28 spots, it's 28 spots, but I would say let's just move forward with it. I'm in favor of just getting it done tonight rather than delaying it another month or two, going back and forth. So that's where I was at.
Councilmember Gottschall.
I was just going to ask, sorry, quick question. So you're saying that rather than tabling or anything, we just refer it back to Planning Commission, or?
Essentially, yes.
But is it with conditions, and they would look at it at final, and then it would come to you at final, right?
No, they could essentially refer it back to Planning Commission, which then puts them back at step one. So it's still preliminary.
Okay, sorry, yes.
So you should change completely and say refer the preliminary site plan, the preliminary condominium plan to Planning Commission. that'd be the alternative, if you want to add that as a third alternative.
Councilmember Behrman.
I'm not in favor of tabling it. I think the applicant has heard my concerns, and I hope that when it comes back to us at final, the concerns have been addressed, or at least justified. You know, they have data to support the number they're asking for, and then maybe my opinion would be different. I think overall, this is a nice project, and it needs to move forward. I do think I would recommend that when you guys do go back to planning for final, that you amend your waiver you asked for previously, because the language in the waiver was you were asking for 196 spots, but the site plan has 311. So I think what the waiver you're asking for in planning needs to be the number of spots you're actually asking for. And I think that's where the confusion has lied, maybe with some members of planning, and maybe even myself when I first looked at this, is because the numbers on the plan are 196, but the actual numbers are 311. So if those numbers matched everywhere in the planning packet and the request to the planning consultant for the waiver, perhaps we would have saved an hour of our time tonight. But I don't even know if we need to put any specific language in tonight, because frankly speaking, the applicant wants to get this approved, and they're going to take a look at it, and if the parking spaces don't make sense, and they don't need 311 spots, they're going to trim the 28 or 30 that they can to, one, save their money and make it a nicer development that they can sell quicker. So that's, I guess, where I kind of fall. Is that-
Now, what we did not do, and it's obvious, we did not count the garage spaces because we were thinking of it in real life terms, not in drawing board terms where people are going to park in the garage. I think we all agree that there's going to be families there, either multiple cars or little children with toys that are going to stack the garage full of riding tricycles or whatever they've got. But we'll take the view of 2 cars, 1 car in every garage, 2 cars in a 2-car garage.
I think it's a very fair analysis. I just don't think, given the fact that it's defined in our ordinance, the numbers you're asking for in the waiver need to go with what the numbers are in our ordinance, would be my opinion. But that being said, I do thank you for putting together what looks to be a very nice development. And I look forward to it being built.
Councilmember Sharp.
Thank you, Mayor. I was looking at the points that we were talking about adding a last point to the items that were recommended by Planning Commission to us, and we were going to agree with the preliminary, assuming they address these. 16 points, is that how many are in there? 18. Oh, there's 18 now?
Yeah, we recommended 16 to the planning commission, they added 2.
They added 2. So is point 4 still relevant? It says applicant shall reduce provided parking to 168 spaces or request waiver from Planning Commission. If reduced, additional space should be allocated to open space or site amenities.
So that was addressed.
I've lost track of the math, I guess. Is that?
No, and I apologize. It's because between the review letter that's in your packet is the same review letter that went to the planning commission. So that was, us saying they either need to address this or a waiver needs to be granted. In the 18 conditions, so right, the version where they added to, that became the waiver was granted by the planning commission. So they specifically added that to their motion.
We've already talked about this somewhere, and Planning Commission said, yeah, let's go to 190. I guess that gets back to Councilmember Behrman's.
I don't think
What
we
was,
knew the
they
number
didn't
they
know
were
what the
voting
number
on.
was they were looking at.
They
Because
did
I
have
know
numbers.
Planning Commission, they are, Councilmember Gottschall, I heard you, but they do this every 2 weeks, this kind of thing. And they're super diligent, and I don't think they would have missed this if they had been informed correctly.
If I could interject, at that planning commission meeting, we did have discussion about there wouldn't be 2 cars in a 2-car garage. There was some discussion that at least some, if not all of the occupants would use part of their garage space as storage. That was out in the open. Whether we're right or we're wrong, I'm not contesting that. I'm just telling you the
This
thought
item
process.
of parking didn't just arise here on the dais. It's been discussed, and somebody thought that was too many, 190 or however many were in there, reduced to 168, I don't know. Let's add back the point. Is that, is anybody, I guess I'd have to make a motion to see where everybody is, but. Add back point 19 now to reduce parking spaces to 168, or else provide additional. No, don't even put.
No, I wouldn't even put it in there. This is a great project. It's very
Yeah, I
nice,
love the look.
with the exception of the parking, okay?
When I
They've-
first looked at the plan, I was like, well, there must not be any garages. That's what I thought, because there were so many parking spaces. And then I looked at the plans, and oh, they got garages, so.
They've-
Weird.
Okay, they've listened to us for an hour now. They've listened to us strongly for an hour now. Okay, when it comes back to us after planning, they better have either a reduced parking or the logic of why the spaces are there, so we can vote on it. I don't think we need to add anything. I don't think we need to table anything. I think we just need to approve it and move on. We've heard it, everybody knows, everybody's in agreement up here. They know what they have to do. They gotta come back with it or it's not gonna get approved. It's that simple. Councilmember Gaccio.
Thank you. If nothing is added to the recommendation in the motion, are the developers and planning commission allowed to change stuff like that? I guess that was one of my earlier questions, like, how much of this is allowed to change between preliminary and final?
I don't know that there's a fine line in the ordinance that defines like, oh, you know, X amount of square feet changed, so it goes back to this step. Unless you have a finer, better answer than that, but
No.
it's generally about the location of, like, are the location of the buildings, are the key features of the site relatively similar to you know, what was originally approved or approved with conditions. You know, there's a degree of discretion, but it harkens back to my point. When there are conditions, the specificity matters. You know, it's helpful in that sense. So, and it will depend on how they address those comments.
There's a preliminary site plan that they've gone through already. There's a final site plan. That implies there's differences between preliminary and final. So yes, they can address those things.
Okay, I just want to make sure that it's not an instance where, oh, that wasn't a condition, so they can't address it. Like, only the things that can be changed are the things that are listed as conditions.
I mean, I would say based on this conversation, I think we're all on the same page that parking can be addressed. It will depend on to what degree it affects the rest of the site, you know, and that was Mateo's point earlier, that if there's a version where to address the parking, all the buildings flip and the access points are different, well, no, right? That wouldn't meet that point. Based on this conversation, I do believe that we're all on the same page of, you know, not having to start this all over to address parking. It just depends on how it's done.
All right, I guess I'm kind of stuck because I think more exploration can be done with the layout of the buildings to maybe address the parking and the green space and still maintain some density. So I know I'm gonna be in the minority on that, but that's, I don't know. I hope we can get it addressed. It sounds like if it's approved tonight as it is, then they can look at it, but there's no guarantee that anything will actually be done, and then we're kind of in a position where it's approve or deny, correct?
Or refer back.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, I got a motion and a second to approve the recommendation to approve a preliminary condominium plan from Quadrants Development LLC for a 70-unit condominium development on a 7.2 acre portion of the 10.4 acre site that is conditionally zoned VCA-TR Village Center Area Transitional Parcel Identification Number 22-06-200-035 with conditions as recommended by the Planning Commission. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Councilmember Behrman,
Yes.
Councilmember Gotchall,
No.
Councilmember Gremlin Fox,
Yes.
Councilmember O'Day,
Yes.
Councilmember Sharp,
Aye.
Mayor Beagle,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Resnick,
Aye.
ayes have it, motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to new business number 3 is a recommendation to approve the introduction of an amendatory ordinance to amend Title 18.00 zoning to add a new section 18.26 renewable energy facilities for the purpose of regulating renewable energy facilities, including solar, wind, and battery storage systems within the provisions of Michigan Public Act 233 of 2023 as recommended by the Planning Commission. Do I have a motion? Thank you. Assistant City Manager Benson.
Thank you, Mayor. This is another item that ultimately I will ask Mr. Pasalakwa to do the heavy lifting on, but just to kind of set the stage for this, you may have heard in 2023, the Michigan State Legislature and the governor signed a new state law that essentially preempts local control over utility-scale renewable energy projects. Mateo will kind of walk through what that means in terms of scale and size, and it's included in the ordinance, but the shortest story to this is that the legislature offers the opportunity for local communities to adapt what's called a compatible renewable energy ordinance. And what that does is allows local communities the opportunity to at least review utility scale projects, right? Otherwise, in the absence of a compatible renewable energy ordinance, or PREO, projects automatically go to the Michigan Public Services Commission. So again, I'll pass to Mr. Pasalakwa to walk through kind of the process and how we got to this point. But this is something we've been working on with the Planning Commission for the last few months, as well as the city attorney, and has led to this item as well as the following 2 zoning-related items.
Good evening. So, as Mr. Benson had mentioned, Public Act 233 passed in November of 23 and became effective in November of 24. And it does provide, it essentially does provide state preemption for utility scale facilities with solar, wind, and battery storage sites. To kind of frame this, the types of projects the state law refers to are 50 megawatt solar fields, which are typically anywhere between 500 to 600 acres. 100 megawatt wind farms, which again are anywhere between 500 to 600 acres. There's a lot of topographical and natural feature information that goes with that, but that's a general assessment. And then 50 megawatt battery storage facilities, which can actually be placed on anywhere from 5 to 15 acres. So if you have projects that are at those megawatt thresholds or more, you qualify for a Public Act 233 project. And really what the law set up was it said that communities can have an ordinance that essentially matches the state law, and that will allow them kind of the local review power, but the requirements of those sites are prescribed by the law and the community needs to follow them, or the community can say, we don't have that, we'll just defer to MPSC, and the review goes to the state to basically assess based on the same criteria. One of the things that has evolved over time is this thought of what a workable ordinance is. So when the law first passed, there were a lot of questions that were created about what was allowed and what wasn't. The requirements are not, it's not a long list of what these developments would have to do in order to necessarily be approved. So things like zoning questions, as far as whether or not you could apply zoning and things of that nature, kind of bubbled to the surface over the last year. And so what the state kind of came back with was, well, if you can develop a workable ordinance, meaning something reasonable, it still might not be considered non-compliant with Public Act 233. And so really where this comes into play is the overlay that I'll discuss in a few minutes. But one of the things that we've kind of seen is that the MPSC has a year to review these projects and approve them. A local community would have 120 days. For that reason alone, we kind of feel as though the developers, as long as your ordinance is reasonable, will opt to work with the community as opposed to going to the MPSC and dealing with the state. Something to kind of consider with these projects is that they can be on non-contiguous sites, meaning you can have one in this part of town, and actually they can cross municipal borders. One of the rules, though, is that the sites are all connected via transmission lines and have one tie-in back to the grid. It might be a little bit more technical than what's needed, but just to kind of give you this idea that the developer does not need to come up with 500 acres alone. They could come up with 250 sites, 200 sites, so on and so forth.
The other thing, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
just to highlight, one of the things we talked about is, we give these estimates for how much space for specifically wind and solar are required, but the law references the power that they generate. So while we think that those space requirements are relevant, are applicable now, changes in technologies 5-10 years from now could theoretically decrease the space requirements for, to meet those same standards. So we don't know how that plays out, but it is another component to when we talk to the Planning Commission, why opting for and recommending our own local ordinance to offer some level of kind of future protection, that at least we're involved in the conversations as they evolve with emerging technologies.
And the CREO draft that you have in front of you tonight does comply with all those state requirements outlined for those systems. The only additional information or the only additional requirements that are there is that there is the potential for the city to require additional studies and the use of the overlay map. It is still unclear whether or not you are allowed to apply a zoning restriction to these systems, meaning they could go in R1 if you couldn't apply a zoning restriction. The position we took with that was we would rather put forward a reasonable geography and an overlay forward, something that a developer could work with, as opposed to not putting anything forward at all and kind of not even having that exercise prepped, only to find out that the state would allow you to apply a zoning restriction. It was kind of a preemptive, let's go through the exercise of picking the sites now in hopes that it's a reasonable amount of property that's offered up, as opposed to having the state say that, yeah, you could apply zoning restrictions, and we never went through the exercise, and now there's an application at the front desk proposing this in an area where it might not be very compatible. We have worked with the city's legal counsel. They have provided us with some edits, so what you have in front of you tonight is both a coordination between the city planning consultants and the legal consultants. And again, so the state-sized systems comply with all the requirements. There's some additional studies. There is an overlay. And you want to tee it up for something?
I was just going to add, our ordinance that's proposed, and Mateo, please correct me if I'm wrong, we also have a Schedule B, which references not utility scale renewable energy projects. So to some extent, we're also trying to, this ordinance accommodates for scenarios where it might be a standalone, let's say, principal use of a solar farm, but it might be under the 50 or 500 megawatts. And this ordinance also protects us for those which wouldn't be covered by the state's preemption.
Correct. So we wanted to kind of complete the exercise. If we get an application for a 100-acre solar field, that's a big project. And it's probably more feasible in communities like this where you're a little bit more built out and the size of the amount of land. The whole point of this law was to kind of promote these developments, not necessarily thinking that all of them would be this big. We wanted to kind of be prepared for ones that might be smaller, but still by optics would still be huge. And so, as Drew had mentioned, there is a Schedule B within this ordinance that does speak to those projects. The state has no authority over those, and those are developed with a little bit more stringent requirements or hometown requirements that we wanted to put in there because we can, because the state law doesn't refer to it. One last item to just kind of keep in consideration is the MPSC, because all these questions came out about the law, the MPSC did issue back late last year an interpretation of the law. That has found its way to the courts, and we do think that this law will eventually be amended via the courts, just because there are some vaguity, or there's some vagueness that needs to be hashed out. One of the things that the MPSC did say that they interpreted that you could reach your megawatt size thresholds via a hybrid system. So if you had a site that had both solar and battery proposed and they met the megawatt sites, that would then be a project that would qualify for Public Act 233 preemption requirements. The reason that's important is because if you notice, the battery systems don't need a lot of land. So a developer might be able to kind of put a project together that has 100 acres of solar, 10 acres of battery storage, and it does qualify as a Public Act 233 project. Again, hopefully I'm kind of making myself clear. I'm happy to answer questions. The last piece of what you have in front of you tonight is that the Planning Commission, again, kind of wanted to go full circle on this and wanted to look at solar and wind and storage as accessory uses. So we did amend the existing ordinance to be a little bit clear on the placement of those smaller scale type systems. We'd be talking rooftop solar panels or small scale wind turbines, to allow either property owners on built sites, rooftop, or available land to put those systems on as well.
If I can clarify something quickly with Mr. Pasalacqua. So you referenced the MPSC clarifying things. Was that what's referenced on page 5 of the city attorney's letter where it says the 91-page order?
Yes, so
I'm
yes.
glad they simplified it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. The MPSC's interpretation of the law is currently being legally contested as well.
Deputy Mayor Resnick.
Thank you. First of all, Mateo, I appreciate it, and I understand the need for the local ordinance so that we don't get preempted by some of the state statutes. And I also appreciate the fact that Planning Commission took the time to include those smaller facilities, ancillary uses that might be done on private property. The practicality of it, though, in the city of Wixom, with the land available, probably only the battery type renewable energy would be really practical, right? To develop.
With current technologies, I would agree with you. The odds of us getting any of these three are very low,
Right.
at least at utility scale. That is correct.
Utility scale. Okay. Yeah, I would, just looking at the zoning map and what's available and what's not. Okay.
And for reference, my apologies, the overlay, when we put the parcels together, the overlay accounts for about 350 acres.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's more of an effort to be reasonable.
Right. So it wouldn't get to the 500 acres, but, okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? All
I
right.
want to say one more thing, Mayor, just because I want to clarify something. The Deputy Mayor mentioned something about we want to make sure that we don't get preempted. I think this is an exercise in attempting to exercise local control over something that ultimately you will not have local control over the way that this is written. If there was ever anything that was possible to be implemented in the city of Wixom, the 233 preempts.
But
That's
if
what the-
it's
that's what the state.
reasonable ordinance, then.
Yeah, and then they use the word reasonable, and they can interpret that yours is not reasonable, and so on and so forth. So I'm suspicious as to whether we're going to exercise any real local control over this because the state's preempted.
It may go away altogether. All right.
At least we'll see it first.
That's exactly correct. We will have the opportunity, if this is passed, we will have the opportunity to at least have them come through us at one point. If they don't like the answer, they go to the MPSC
Right.
and try to get a different one. So again, it's an attempt to try to exercise some control.
But the
over it.
foresight of, future planning for the smaller footprint ancillary uses.
By the same token, I console myself with the fact that we don't have a lot of exposure here, I don't.
Right. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I've got a motion and a second to approve the recommendation to approve the introduction of an amendatory ordinance to amend Title 18.00 zoning to add a new section 18.26 renewable energy facilities for the purpose of regulating renewable energy facilities, including solar, wind, and battery storage systems within the provisions of Michigan Public Act 233 of 2023 as recommended by the Planning Commission. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. New business number 4 is a recommendation to introduce an amendatory ordinance to amend Title 18.00 zoning, Chapter 18.13 accessory buildings and uses, Sections 18.13.070 and 18.13.080 to clarify the placement and standards for solar panels and wind generators as an accessory structures as recommended by the Planning Commission. Do I have a motion?
Support.
Mr. Benson?
I won't dive into this all that strongly. It's a relatively minor amendment to an existing ordinance. We already had standards for solar panels and wind generators. Based on the conversation with the Planning Commission around CREO, they wanted to make some adjustments to those ordinance sections. The red line version and clean copy are in your packet. If you have any questions about those, we're happy to answer them.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I got a motion and a second to approve the recommendation to introduce an amendatory ordinance to amend Title 18.00 zoning, Chapter 18.13, accessory buildings and uses, Sections 18.13.070 and 18.13.080 to classify the placement and standards for solar panels and wind generators as accessory structures as recommended by the Planning Commission. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Bear with me here on this one. I have a recommendation to introduce an amendatory ordinance to rezone tax parcel numbers 22-07-200-007, 22-07-200-020, 22-08-100-057, 22-05-300-018, 22-05-300-017, 22-05-300-001, 22-05-151-014, 22-06-400-026, and 22-06-400-025 from M1 Light Industrial to M1 Light Industrial with the renewable energy zoning overlay as recommended by the Planning Commission. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Again, relatively straightforward here. All that this amendatory ordinance would do is place the overlay on the existing parcels. Actually, now that I look at this, I might have made a typo. The majority of the parcels that are included here are zoned M1. Two of them are zoned M2, and one, the ITC lines, is technically zoned IRO. So I apologize for that. I didn't even realize that I had made that mistake. However, the ultimate point here is that they retain the underlying zoning and all of the rights and permitted and special land uses they already had. What this map amendment does is just indicate that those parcels are designated for renewable energy projects and being applicable to Chapter 18.26 if implemented.
Councilmember Gatchel.
Thank you. I know you had a lot of numbers to go through. I believe it was mentioned, I know it's typed differently, but I think the second parcel, the mayor said -020 to end instead of 22.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that that's, I don't know if we have to amend it or not, but I would have just said as listed, but.
I'm going to do that. I'm going back now.
You took a stab at it. Aside from that, I did have a question. Why are we limiting like the areas this could apply to? Like I noticed in certain sections it looks like the map overlay is being applied to certain sections of the ITC power lines, but not others more to the north of the city. And I'm just wondering why we wouldn't apply it to everything or spread it out across more of the M1 and like just for future planning. We don't know how anything's going to be repurposed, and I would almost feel it smarter to start larger and rather than have to go back later and say, oh yeah, we'll add it here.
Ultimately, when we went through this process, actually Planning Commission had pared down what we originally looked at, and it came down to a couple of key factors. One, we were targeting properties that are undeveloped or underdeveloped or were existing utility lines. Also, we were essentially trying to keep all of this south of Pontiac Trail. So as an example, there was an M1 zone parcel north of Pontiac Trail that is adjacent to residential zone properties. It's about 40 acres, so I mean, could theoretically be a target for one of the Schedule B projects. Planning Commission specifically was intending to try to keep these away from residentially zoned properties. That's why they're all south of Pontiac Trail and don't include the ITC lines north of Pontiac Trail, because in the off chance that, again, ITC wants to start throwing, wind turbines or solar panels underneath that, that wasn't what planning commission was looking for. That was their recommendation.
Okay, yeah, I think in some, like if they want to put solar panels along their lines, I don't know that I would have an issue with that necessarily. But just in terms, like, it's obviously kind of narrow and zigzaggy, looks like a congressional district almost. But like, why not expand beyond what it is now? If it's just an overlay, why not just overlay it over everything or much more? I know trying to focus on what's not developed, but just for the sake of like repurposing property in the future, why not just start a little bit larger?
I guess I don't want to speak too much for the planning commission, but I think they wanted to take a more restrictive approach to start with. I mean, there is always the option that if like let's say ITC wanted to do it along all of their lines, they would have the right and ability to come request a rezoning to be incorporated into that overlay.
Okay.
So there is a mechanism for them to seek that change if it was so desired.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, I got a motion and a second to approve the recommendation to introduce an amendatory ordinance to rezone the tax parcel numbers as listed from M1 light industrial to M1 light industrial with the renewable energy zoning overlay as recommended by the Planning Commission. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, great, motion carries.
Thanks for clarification on what parcels.
New business number 6 is a request for authorization to participate in the Sourcewell Cooperative Purchase Contract with the Public Restroom Company of Minden, Nevada for completion of restroom facility at Gunnar Metalla Park at a cost of $319,607 from Gunnar Metalla Park. Improvement accounts number 401-751-974.543. Do I have a motion?
Support.
Ms. McGee, thank you for your patience.
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you doing?
Good.
Good.
I'm here to request authorization as the title of the report is to participate in the Sourcewell Cooperative Purchasing for the public restroom at Gunnar Metalla for $319,607. The remainder of the Gunnar Metalla Park improvements will be in a bid that's going out in 2 weeks, which will include 2 pavilions and a walking path. But for this right now, this is a turnkey operation and it's through the national bid, so we're looking for authorization to move forward.
Very good.
Any questions?
Councilmember Grella Fox.
Hi there.
Hi.
So I see that it's a prefab, and I was looking at the design, which is kind of hard to tell, but it's not gonna look like a shed, right?
No.
That's kind of the impression I get from the picture.
Well, actually, we've upgraded quite a bit from the initial prefab. So we've added a little bit, if you'll look at the picture, we've added some rock on the bottom, we've added a little different colors to it to make it look a little bit nicer, yes.
Oh, okay. I thought it was-
Yeah. Oh, you can't see it on the,
Yeah.
if you look at it online, it's got a gray roof, it's got some white like staff on it, looks a lot nicer.
Okay, good. That's it. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Deputy Mayor Resnick.
Thank you. Ms. McGee, it looks like the doors are key lock, possibly, just from the rendering here?
Yes, actually, we're requesting, they're auto locks, so we'll have them programmable, so the cops
Okay.
don't have to open and close around.
But you don't have to, very good, that was my question. Thank you.
Councilmember Sharp?
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. McGee, I think I know the answer to this question, but the $319,000 for the restroom, I saw the pictures, all looks fine, interesting. Well, they're going to drop it off a truck and with a crane and put it in the spot. That sounds great. So the total budget for Gunnar Metalla was $988,000 or $998. Do you envision? I say we don't need a budget amendment yet because we're not even close to $998,000. But when we get all the rest of the project in front of us,
We will be in budget.
do you foresee we'll still be under 998?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good. Councilmember Behrman?
Is it going to the exact same location as the current bathroom?
Pretty close.
The cost to demolish the current bathroom?
That will be in the second bid that goes out with the contractor.
And the only thing I'd have to add to that is, if we could take a look at whether or not the display gazebo next to it is something that we're gonna utilize, or whether or not it needs to go when the bathroom goes,
It needs to go.
because I don't think there's been anything there for years, and it's starting to look pretty bad as well.
Right, and we're moving it a little bit south so that we can take care of some underground utilities and clean those up.
I'm just saying, so when bid goes out to remove the bathroom, if you want the display case gone, let's remove that too.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gatchel.
Although this is going to seem like a sarcastic question, we've learned from experience that it really isn't. How fireproof is this?
It'll meet all the codes.
In terms of like, would there be serious damage though if like we had someone start a fire in there last year, was it, or 2 years ago?
About 3 years ago.
Okay. Is this going to burn more than cinder block? Will there be more damage than?
No, it's designed to be commercial vandal proof. I
Okay.
mean, that's the reason we're doing the prefab.
Okay, all right, thank you. I just want to make sure it's not going to be something where somebody does it again and it burns
No.
more than cinder block does, and then we're
It's
spending.
built to stand commercial
Okay,
use.
thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, I got a motion and a second to approve the request for authorization to participate in the Sourcewell Cooperative Purchasing Contract with Public Restroom Company of Minden, Nevada for the completion of the restroom facility at Gunner Metalla Park at a cost of $319,607 from Gunner Metalla Park Improvements Account number 401-751-974.543. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries. Thank you. Thanks, Ms. McGee. New business number 7 is a recommendation to consider adoption of a resolution to place a charter amendment on a November 4th, 2025 general election ballot to amend Chapter 4.11.e to require an election to fill a vacancy on city council at the next regular city election instead of at the end of the unexpired term of the vacant office. Do I have a motion? City Manager Brown.
Thank you, Your Honor. So this is just in reaction to a discussion that was held at council recently, where we came to the realization when we were going through the process of appointing Nicole O'Day to the vacancy created by Rob Smiley's election to the county commission and his subsequent resignation. As we went through that process, we basically determined that when a charter amendment was done in 2023 at the November election, the intent was just simply to close a several-week window in terms of the term of an appointment for somebody filling a vacancy. The language was put forward through the attorney and through the state, frankly, and brought back to us, and not caught by me, not caught by council, and it was passed with the language that was put before voters in November of 2023, and it not only corrected the 6-week issue, but created a new issue in that it changed the appointment for somebody filling a vacancy from until the next regular city election for the balance of the unexpired term. So that eventually resulted in Ms. O'Day being appointed to the council for a 3-year term, essentially, ending in 2028, as opposed to ending after the November election in 2026. Actually, it would have been 01/01/26. Instead, it's ending in 01/01/28. Council indicated that they wanted to address that by virtue of a consensus. We developed this language in consultation with the city attorney again, and hopefully this language will fix the problem that was created inadvertently while leaving the fix that was intended, and that is what it will do. The language is put in front of you. If you have any questions about it, please let me know. But the intent is to leave the gap fix and to go back to the practice of having somebody who's appointed only serve until the next regular city election, until after that next regular city election.
Discussion? Councilmember Barron.
I'll just add that I'm happy with the appointment of Nicole O'Day, but I do support us fixing this for the future.
Councilmember Sharp?
I'm sorry, I just have a question. So, in Ms. O'Day's case, just as a case, not as a person, happy with the appointment. She would have had to run, she would have gotten 2 years to fill out Rob Smiley's term and would have had to run in November of 2026 no, she would have to run in November 2025.
Correct.
Yeah,
She would be running this year.
This year.
So,
For the
because
next 2 years.
Rob Smiley's term ended this year.
No.
His term wasn't going to end until 2028.
Oh, 2028. So it's just until, so it'd be every 2 years, and then the ballot would read to fill out the balance of the term of the person who had retired or resigned. That's how the ballot would read at that
So-
point, because it would have to be just a 2-year term that you're voting for somebody instead of a 4-year term that everybody else would be voting on.
Yeah, it's good.
Vote on.
It'll say elects so-and-so with a term to expire June or December 31st, 2027.
Okay. So if somebody, because at that point you'd be doing all your campaigning and running and signatures for 2 years. But that same person, I'm just throwing this out there, just devil's advocate. That same person might say, you know what, I'm gonna resign that 1-year term and I'm just gonna run for a 4-year term rather than try to do all that work for 1 year or 2 years. It would be 2 years minimum.
So if I
Might
understand the
just say-
question, right, so in this circumstance, if the charter language had been changed just to eliminate that gap and not to create the problem with the unexpired term
Yeah.
language, Nicole O'Day would have been appointed for a term that would have ended on January 1st of 2026 at noon.
Right.
Right?
And so she might have said come this April, you know what, I'm not gonna go through all this work to get elected for 2 years.
That's a possibility.
I'm just gonna resign and go run for 4 years on a different spot, and then somebody else is gonna have to come and run for a 2-year.
Well,
That's
the
fine.
one
But,
2-year spot.
but she wouldn't have to resign though, because her term is gonna be up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you pull
Yeah.
pull the ballots or
Mhm.
pull the signature
Yeah,
thing,
'cause
saying, I'm
her-
gonna run for a full 4-year.
Yeah, because her
Right.
if she
Okay.
ran for a
Fair
4-year
enough.
term,
Yeah, you wouldn't have
it
to
wouldn't
resign.
start till 12/01, so technically.
So we would have 2 sets of things the city clerk would have to worry about. One, who pulled sheets for 4 years and who pulled signature sheets for 2 years. And you'd be crazy to want to do all that work for 2 years, wouldn't you? So how will we be able to get anybody to fill a spot?
Yeah, Tia did.
Yeah.
You ran?
We do. Yeah, I had to fill that term and then I ran.
Oh. Well, I stand
Because I
corrected.
was crazy.
I have no comment.
Thank you.
I don't think so.
So the situation we're going to fix actually didn't need fixing until now, because before, when Tia ran, it was.
Yeah, so-
It was correct, the situation was correct?
Right, we
And now
set about to correct the 6-week gap problem.
Yeah, I know
And-
that.
And
yeah.
we did that, but then we created another problem with the language as it was approved. So, yes.
So
we
before
created-
that, it was okay.
There
for
was a
this
6-week
situation.
problem,
Yeah.
but the term problem was not there. So
Got it.
we fixed one, but created another by the way the language was passed.
All right.
Unintended consequence.
I was all
think.
set
See,
to vote
but
no,
she was-
now I
they
have to
were-
go yes, since Tia did.
She was appointed till the election, but when she was elected and won the election, her term didn't start till January 1st. So you had from the election till January 1st, where we had a vacancy up here, because we couldn't fill it.
No, I remember, because I had to be appointed to
Yeah.
it for 6 weeks
Yep.
and then come back and.
Yep.
Yep, very good. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, I got a motion and a second to approve the recommendation to consider adoption of the resolution to place a charter amendment on the November 4th, 2025 general election ballot to amend Chapter 4.11.e to require an election to fill a vacancy on city council at the next regular city election instead of at the end of unexpired term of the vacant office. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, new business number 6 is a discussion of the Downtown Development Authority meeting minutes from their meeting of Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. Deputy Mayor Resnick.
Thank you, Mayor. It's item number 8, but that's okay. I was reading the minutes from the November 19th, 2024 DDA meeting, and the C2G safety audit report. We got the SEMCOG grant to do that safety audit along Wixom Road. The comments in the meeting were, that the city indicated their initial opinion that we should install bollards along Pontiac Trail and those portions of Wixom Road so a car can't possibly get through. And yet C2G's recommendation was, well, we're more worried about the vehicular damage, and it's a delicate balance. My opinion is that pedestrian life and death is far more important than vehicle damage, and we've got 3 incidents of cars coming into that stretch along the safety path, or along the Michigan Airline Trail, along Pontiac Trail in front of Country Corners. If you look this winter, when the trail itself wasn't plowed, you see tires going into that area right now for people meaning to turn into the trailside coffee shop. So I think we need to push this a little bit harder with the county. See if we can get C2G to reassess that opinion, because I know that the county would use their opinion as to whether bollards should be installed or not. And there's hundreds of examples that I found online of cities across this nation that have bollards installed along pedestrian pathways that are adjacent to public roads that are, some are ornamental, but they all look very effective. So I think we just need to push this a little bit harder. So that was my only comment that I wanted to make.
Very good. Councilmember Gatchel.
Thank you. This is a concern that the deputy mayor and I have shared for a while as well, and I know the planter boxes were brought up. What is the process? I mean, C2G has made their opinions, and that's what they are, opinions. Does whatever have to be done, is that something that has to be approved or funded or done by the county? Or can we just put up bollards and call it a day?
So to some extent it depends, but broadly speaking, yes, the county has to be involved because Pontiac Trail and Wixom Road are county roads, so it's their rights of way, so they would have to grant us permission. They likely would not pay for it, so we would pay to install things in their right of way. But they do have jurisdiction over those rights of way.
So regardless, I mean, regardless of this audit report, let's say we applied to do that, what is the likelihood that they say no, granted that they've given us planter boxes on the other side?
I would say, so there was a representative from the Road Commission for Oakland County who participated in the study group for this study. So at a minimum, they're aware of the city's feelings about that particular corner and our, strong preferences alongside city councils for formal bollards. We've not officially kind of broached them with a proposal yet. My gut is, that won't be their preference and there may be pushback. I couldn't say for certain that they would say no. And I'd like to think that with a well-reasoned argument, and some justifications and perhaps even some, modifications or mitigations that make them feel more comfortable with formal bollards, I'd like to think that we could still get it done. It's just, I can't say that for certain at this moment.
So the audit recommended planter boxes, it looks like, correct? Not bollards?
I don't have it in front of me. I know that was one of the suggestions. There's also been talk about like flexible or, more flexible delineators that have like reflections on them. I think we use some on like the curve on Maple Road as an example. So both are potential options. The thing with planter boxes compared to bollards, and this could be a differentiation with the county, is their distance from the edge of curb. So in some cases, planter boxes tend to be somewhat farther away, or in the case of that corner, you know, when they're alongside a road, you're less likely to drive directly into them, if that makes sense. So I think some placement considerations could matter too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess if we wanted to get something done this construction season, I mean, is this something that we would be paying for, DDA would be paying for, we would be splitting? Have we not had that discussion?
We have not formally had that discussion. We have, since that report came out, we've been working with HRC on, you know, a couple different options. One is what I'll call a potential short-term option, you know, the quick, cheap, and easy, which is, you know, bolting in some flexible delineators to at least do something in the short term while we design a longer-term option. We've also been talking about the designing piece, but no, we have not formally talked about who would pay for it or specifically what it would cost. It really depends on the solution.
Okay. I would prefer, I guess, that we start moving all of those pieces to like get this done this construction season, like early construction season preferably before summer. I mean, I don't know that it takes a lot of engineering. The bollards are pre-constructed, so it is what it is. And then push the county on it. We've waited a few years patiently for nothing to happen, and luckily no one's been killed yet, but there's instances every day that pedestrians are getting hit by cars, and I share the same sentiment that pedestrian or bike riders, safety is more important than a few dings on somebody that's driving erratically or having some sort of medical condition anyway. But I think all of our accidents have been people driving erratically or recklessly, not medical conditions. So I think those aren't the same. So I would like to see us address this spring before everybody gets back out on the trail. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Councilmember Brown Fox?
So I'm not quite sure what Ballard? Is that what it's called?
Bollards. Posts.
Oh, it's just a post. So if we did something like a planter box, is the thought that it's not as durable as these posts? I mean, I just think it would look nicer. I agree from the safety aspect, but I just don't, I guess I can't picture what that's gonna.
I don't want to fully speak for I'll say more qualified road professionals. Part of the appeal of planters is they tend to be easier to break. So one of the concerns with bollards specifically is they're usually very, very stable. If anything hits them, they don't move. Planter boxes will move. They tend to be lower, so you're more likely to ramp over them, where bollards, you're more likely to wrap around them. And that's where the concern comes from you know, C2G and the Road Commission, is it's when people do hit them, it increases the fatality rates for the people in vehicles. I do not disagree. No, I don't think you'll find anyone here who disagrees about pedestrian safety being more important, especially in the local context. But just to give you that piece, that is where their fear comes from. They have data that shows bollards, when hit head on, are more fatal for vehicular traffic.
Thank you.
And if I could just kind of put a finer point on that, you know, the same issue applies in reverse there, right? So the purpose of the item that you're placing there is to protect people who are walking where they're supposed to walk from an unwanted interaction with a vehicle. And to say we don't want to, we're worried about the concerns of the vehicles that are leaving the roadway and entering a walkway to the detriment of the safety of people that are using an area that's intended for their use, I just don't follow. So the discussion about a planter box and how they like that better, they might like that better, but if I'm walking on the sidewalk or the pathway there and they ride over top of the planter box and hit me still, I'm not going to like that better. So the idea is to protect pedestrians. I think that when the time comes and we're going to ask for this, we just need to write, maybe we have council pass support for a letter that indicates that we're strongly in support of bollards, notwithstanding the safety audits discussion to the contrary. Or you could do that today, but at 9:20, I'd probably hope that we would do that at a different point in time. But you could do that, and I think that's what we probably should do someday if that's what you want to proceed with.
Yeah.
Councilmember Behrman, and then,
I was just gonna add, I think with that space being more narrow than the other side of the street where we put the planters, I mean, I don't know if
It's a space.
planters are gonna fit as well there anyways. I think, you know, in between the trees and the light posts, having a nice black post that's gonna stop anything that hits it, it's gonna save us a lot of money in replacing our light posts over the years. Because, I mean, those light posts, we've replaced, what, 4 or 5 of them now? Now, that being said, that one individual that did take out the entire block of light posts and trees, I believe they survived, but had they hit one of these posts, maybe that would have been different.
Deputy Mayor.
So can I suggest then that we direct the city manager to draft a letter on that
Yep.
resolution, or however
Yep.
we want to do it?
Yeah, we can pass that at the next meeting.
And the next meeting,
Yep.
get it off,
Mhm.
contrary to C2G's recommendation.
Yep.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And that concludes the business portion of the meeting tonight. It's the second call to the public. I won't read the rules of the call to the public again, but I'll just say if anybody's got anything you want to come up and speak your mind for 5 minutes, come on up. Seeing none, I'll close that. City manager comments. City Manager Brown.
Yeah, so in the city manager update, I talked about a couple of different remodeling projects taking place in the city, the police department, the community center, across the pond, if you will, at the community center. Offered the opportunity to tour. If anybody's interested in doing that tonight afterwards, happy to spend a few minutes doing that. It won't take very long to do it. If you want to do it another time, that's another option. If you want to skip it altogether, that's your prerogative as well. And that's all that I had in the city manager update beyond the usual updates in terms of things that are going on in the community going forward. So I see if you have any questions that I could possibly entertain answers for. I'd be willing to do that.
Seeing none. Assistant City Manager Benson, anything?
I have none, sir.
Very good. We move on to council comments. Councilmember Gotchel. Very good. Councilmember Behrman.
When we all agreed to be on council, we all agreed to follow our ordinances. And I think it's important that all of us take the time to go back and read 18.15.010. In that ordinance, it has the definition of how parking is calculated in a residential area. And then more importantly, it has the maximum allowed of parking in a residential area. These need to be addressed before what we spent all of our time on this evening comes back again. The waiver that was granted by the Planning Commission had the wrong numbers, and I really hope that we don't get into a situation again where it isn't clear what the numbers are because someone didn't read our ordinance. That being said, if we don't like the numbers in the ordinance, then let's change the ordinance, but we need to follow it as written, and I expect going forward that the documentation we get will have the correct numbers in it.
Joseph? Very good. Councilmember O'Day.
None from me.
Very good. Councilmember Sharp?
I was gonna say none, but I just got a copy of the planning commission meetings from Wednesday, planning commission meeting minutes from Wednesday, January 22nd. And it does say there was a waiver granted for parking, but it doesn't say what the number is. It just says the word waiver. And I'm gonna suggest to the planning commission that they go check their minutes next time before they approve them. I'm not sure if this is a draft of the minutes or what, but
That is
it's not
draft.
published on our website, and it didn't get to all the council members ahead of the meeting. So I'm not sure what planning commission voted on exactly. That's all, thank you.
Very good. Deputy Mayor Resnick?
No comments tonight.
Very good. All right, I just have one comment tonight, and I just want to wish my fellow council members. I've got you crossed off, I'm sorry. Yeah, you must be pleased.
I have no car. Yeah,
I'm
it's
sorry,
crazy,
I'm sorry.
so-
Councilmember Gremlin Fox, do you have any comments?
comments, thank
Very
you.
good. I just have one comment, and that's just to wish my fellow council member, Mr. Gotcho, a happy birthday tomorrow. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, guys, for everything tonight. Thank you for being patient in the audience. Nope, I'm not going to sing.